Hey guys, well, it's been a while since I posted a video on YouTube, but I decided to get back into the groove, keep some subscribers, and post a video of an argument for God's existence that no one really has ever heard of. The argument I'm going to post is going to be challenged by another YouTube user, Deconverted Man, and we're going to have a back and forth. We planned on doing this some months in the past, but schoolwork got caught up, and even on my break, I still had much to do, so I really promised to get this out there, and I will today. And this is called the argument from God's existence from contingency. Now, before I get into the actual argument, I want to give up some history about my main man, Avicenna, the guy who put this argument forward and on the map. Avicenna is an Arab polymath. His actual Arabic name is Ibn Sina, but the Latins called him Avicenna. So they Latinized his name and brought forward his argument, and his argument goes along these lines. The first premise is an entailing. Premise 1 goes, for any x to exist in logical possibility, it must be non-contradictory. So, if p, then q. If it's logically possible, then it has to be non-contradictory at the very least. Now, if you atheists want to get rid of that, then God can exist in simultaneity while not existing in simultaneity. God can, well, anything can really pretty much go against the laws of logic, so I think it's best that we just both agree to accept this one. So, what does this imply? We'll give an example. While a Bigfoot does not exist in reality, it is logically possible that one exists, because a Bigfoot is non-contradictory. However, that's only logical possibility. That's not logical necessity. Let's go to our second premise. If x logically requires some y to go from logical possibility into existence, it is contingent upon something else. So, according to this premise, if it's necessary, if it has to exist for the sake of its existing, then it is contingent upon something else existing. Alright, let's do a quick review of these premises. What they illustrate are a couple of things. First of all, there are things that are logically possible, mostly for the fact that they are not contradictory. And second of all, because they maintain their possibility, there is just something barring them from grasping at existence. Now, I would maintain on the second premise that whatever stops their existence is basically there isn't a setup of criterion which allows them to exist currently as the way things are. And second of all, they are contingent upon previous circumstances. And these previous circumstances, again, could be a contingent one or a necessary one. So, let us continue. Okay, to move on to the third premise, either the sum total things that are contingent are necessary, or there needs to be one other necessary existent. I said at least one other necessary existent, not that there couldn't be many or a subset of contingent things that are necessary, but at least one necessary thing. Therefore, I would conclude there is one necessary thing in existence that allows all possible x to grasp at having actual existence. Now, I know we've only come to one conclusion, but I'm just going to defend the third premise, at least here, because I can sense kind of an objection, and I just want to get ready right now. If it is a contingent thing, the sum total of all things, then what is it contingent upon? If there is nothing in which it is contingent upon, then that thing is necessary by default. Alright, let's hit it with the first premise, leading us to our next conclusion. If two or more things are necessary, they must be logically independent of one another. Let's get to our next premise. Some x is not identical to y if x has a distinguishing property from y. To give an illustration backing up this premise, let's take Superman and Clark Kent. Whatever happens to Clark Kent happens to Superman, whatever happens to Superman happens to Clark Kent. This being the case, they are the same character. However, Clark Kent is far different than Lois Lane for obvious reasons, because of the fact that they share relatively little in common. Premise 3. If x has a distinguishing property from y, it follows that that property is logically necessary for that being. Thus, it is not necessary in itself, but rather, x is what it is because of the fact that it has said property. It could be like a little mustache. That mustache could be the only thing separating property x from y. So it would follow that that property gives x its distinction and thus its own existence. So because multiple necessary existing things lead us to this kind of absurdity, what is necessary is unique. Premise 1. If something has multiple parts or properties, then it would follow that these properties are distinguishable from one another, and thus the sum total of that thing exists because of those properties. Let's take the notion of an arachnid or a spider. A spider only exists because it has the property of having 8 legs, it has the property of spinning webs, eating flies, so on and so forth, and because of that, it is what it is, a spider. Therefore, a spider could not be necessary, insofar as that it has multiple parts to it. And this would extend also, I believe, to even God himself, if God himself was not divinely simple. Let's take the notion of omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. Now, it would follow because these three are radically different from one another. Power, goodness, knowledge. Because of that, God is made up of these properties collaborating. But because these properties are not God himself, they are parts of God, then God himself could not exist unless he was divinely simple. For more on divine simplicity, I'll explain it in the next video. So the third conclusion is, what is necessary cannot be of multiple parts, cannot be of multiple things, it has to be unique, and therefore at least one exists. No, actually, one has to exist because of that. Now, why do I think that one thing is God? Well, actually, I can't really explain that without going into divine simplicity, so yeah, it's not going to wait till the next video. It's happening right now. So, what is divine simplicity and where does it originate from? Well, many scholars believe that it actually originates from the work of the early Greek philosophers, wherein there is one unchanging principle that moves all of creation, all of the world, all that there is. And of course, as Christians, we believe that that happens to be God. Now, how do we reconcile these two things? Well, we usually take Aristotle's view on this, who inspired both Avicenna and later on inspired the great Christian theologian Thomas Aquinas. Under Aristotle's viewpoint, God is pure actuality. That means he has in him no potential. Now, what do I mean by these two words? A potential is when something could become something else. For example, let's take the notion of water. Water can become ice or it can become steam. It has that potential. Now, it's actually water. It's as it exists. Wet, it's a liquid, so on and so forth. There's a part of it that is actual. So, with that in mind, everything that does exist has potentiality and actuality. However, what is purely actual could never potentially be something else. And that is what moves the universe around. Avicenna actually thought it moved on forever, so a notion of a beginning of time or a beginning at all does not necessarily need to encourage us to go to the notion that there is a creator. Or I should say, a point in creation. Now, why do I mention the fact that we need to think of God in this kind of way? Well, if he is pure actual, then there is no potential in him to not exist. That makes him, in a sense, necessary for all things that are potential and actual. So then why do we go to calling this thing God? Well, specifically for a couple reasons. Well, more like 3 or 4. And here it goes. First of all, if something is good, then it is whole, because evil is a prevasion. So, what do I mean by prevasion? That means evil can only exist in the lack of something. For example, in order to lie, you have to presume that there is truth. If there is no such thing as truth, then there can never be a lie. However, truth does not presuppose that there is lying. If somebody is speaking truthfully about the way things are, then it would follow that everyone could basically do it. Now, why do we get power? Well, God is all-powerful because, or the necessity is all-powerful because anything in which has to exist has to cow down to it because it is in the center of all things in existence. Therefore, being the most powerful makes it the most all-powerful. Now, why do we say God is all-knowing? Well, this is mostly for the fact that if God lacks knowledge, then it also goes to follow that there is something he lacks and he can potentially learn, thus invalidating God as being purely actual. Now, lastly, one might ask, okay, but if God is just reducible to God, then how do we even begin to talk about him? Because all these things are different. Well, this is why we speak of God with analogy. Analogy helps us understand things in a much better light. For example, if I were to say I see the Pythagorean theorem, I am using sight in an analogous way. I am not literally seeing the Pythagorean theorem, but I am apprehending it in a similar way to how I would apprehend my surrounding with my sight. This way of talking about God is what we would call negative theology. Because we don't know what God is like, we just use what God isn't like as a way of defining him. And in terms of trying to relate to him, we just understand that in terms of analogy, like something. And that's how we come to know and understand him a lot better. Well, in any case, that's the argument. Now, I'm not expecting to change deconverted man's mind, or really anyone else's mind, but what I am trying to do is, if not change your mind, have your mind expand and apprehend something new. And I think out of that, we can all have a much better exchange. In any case, deconverted man, I look forward to hearing your reply, and I apologize again for being so tardy with this, man. Please show some forgiveness and take care.